So, hello, I'm FelicityAlgate. I am a principal advisor in the Behavioural Insights team. I lead the team that deals with consumers and financial services. So today I'm just going to give you a brief run through about what Behavioural Insights are, a bit of background about the team, and then spend a little bit of time at the end of the presentation talking about behavioural insights, particularly with regard to why people get into debt, and then just give you a couple of ideas as to approaches that could be taken to help people get out of debt or maybe prevent them to getting into debt in the first place. So, anyway, to start off with, behavioural insights, what are they? So traditionally government has used a number of approaches. It uses regulation, incentives, information, so regulation, laws as to what you can and can't do. Incentives, things like fines if you fail to submit your tax form on time. And then information, so there's lots and lots of information requirements, particularly around financial products, so things like when you get your mortgage, you'll have a key facts document. And behavioural insights doesn't say that you should replace any of these, it actually gives you a new angle to enhance these. So for example, we know that the way you tell people about incentives can affect how they respond to them. So it's another tool in the policymaker's toolkit to help address a range of problems. There's a rich and growing literature. So there's Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which is just a summary of the work. So Daniel Kahneman won a Nobel Prize for Economics for the work he did, and it's just a summary of the work he's done over the past few decades. There's also a book called Nudge, which you might have heard of, which is a guide for policymakers, really. So it sets out kind of implications for how you can apply this stuff to help achieve policy aims. And then there's also a publication called Mindspace, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail shortly, which was written by the Institute from Government. So what is behavioural insights? Really, as I said, it's an additional tool for policymakers, but it also just means that we think differently about behaviour. So we know that we have System 1 and System 2. They're two ways of thinking. So System 1 is all about fast and intuitive decisions. We take automatic shortcuts, and it goes on without us even being aware of it. So it's a bit like our subconscious decision making. So a good example of this is when you're taking your daily commute to work, you'll actually be making lots of tiny little adjustments on the way to work, but you won't really be paying any attention to that at all. You can be thinking about all kinds of things, what you're going to have for your tea, what you're going to do at work that day, and it's really, you are just kind of on autopilot. System 2 is much more kind of deliberative thinking, so this is our conscious thought. So to continue the travel analogy, this is if you were planning a trip overseas that you'd never done before. So it's much harder for us to do, it uses much more energy, and we get much more tired. Now traditionally, policy has always approached things in a System 2 way, so expecting for people to think about things and then make a kind of reasoned decision. And really, actually, what Behavioural Insights is about is whether we can tap into some of that System 1 and help make things a bit easier for people to do. I'm going to talk a little bit more now about Mindspace, so just moving on. So as I said, Mindspace is a guide for policymakers. It was published in 2010 by the Institute for Government. It was commissioned by the Cabinet Office, but IFG is a think tank, and they did the work separately. So Mindspace is a mnemonic, so it's a checklist for policymakers to think about the biggest influencing factors on behaviour. It's got a definite focus on government processes, and it sets out, I would recommend you read it, kind of the findings from the academic literature. So for example, M stands for messenger, I stands for incentives, N stands for norms. I won't go through them all. I should say there are some slides to go with this talk, and that has the mnemonic on it, so you can look at that if you are interested in some more information. So we've got Mindspace, which sets out the behavioural effects, and then we also fairly recently the Behavioural Insights team published a report called East. So we've been using Mindspace for a couple of years. We found it a very useful introductory tool, but actually a little bit too complicated. There are lots of letters, there are 9 letters in Mindspace, and also there are some aspects that are much easier for people to apply than others. So for example, Messenger, people tended to focus on that and think about, which celebrity could we get to endorse a policy or try and approach people. It also wasn't action orientated. So East, so we say if you are a policymaker and you want people to do something, East is you should make it easy, you should make it attractive, you should make it social, and you should make it timely. So they're really focusing on what behaviour you want to change, whereas Mindspace is a bit more of a kind of summary of the relevant literature. So we now use East a lot more. So for example, easy, if you want something to make it easy, so that's kind of obvious in that you make something, help people do things in a simpler way, but also making things easier to understand. So the process is easier, but also the policy is potentially easier to understand. If you want it to be attractive, this is not only about attracting attention in terms of, a big sign or a big poster or something brightly coloured. It's also about making it attractive, for example, by personalisation. So writing a letter saying, "Dear Felicity," is much more likely to get my attention than if it just said, "Dear subscriber." And also, if you put in the first line of the letter, for example, what you want me to do. So you attract my attention by telling me really clearly up front, and actually that combines quite nicely with easy as well. So it's easy for me to understand and it attracts my attention very well. S for social, that's about, for example, social norms, which are also mentioned in Mindspace, and they're a very powerful thing in that we're very heavily influenced by what other people do, and a good sort of easy rule of thumb for us to follow is if lots of other people do it, then it's probably safe for us to do as well. So we will tend to follow that. It's also about promoting the kind of positive behaviours and all that sort of stuff. Timely is about contacting people at the relevant time. So if you're thinking about debt, for example, when is that key moment to get in touch with them? It's perhaps not, expecting them to come to you. It's maybe, for example, targeting them at a specific point. So if you know people are taking on a second loan, maybe that's a good point to contact them to sort of see if they need any help. It's also with Timely about switching around the costs and benefits. So there are lots and lots of activities in life where you have immediate costs or benefits, and then in the future there is the opposite. So, for example, going to the gym today is quite hard work. It might not particularly enjoy it, but the benefit in the future is that I'm fitter and healthier and have better health as a result. Now, is there a way, if you want me to do it, of somehow sort of switching those costs and benefits around? So make it more fun for me to go to the gym, make it more pleasurable for me to eat healthily today. And this ties in with, so the behavioural aspect here is what's called, we discount the future. So we focus a lot on today and we really discount kind of future costs and benefits. So are there ways to flip that around so that it seems more relevant at the time? So I'm now just going to spend a couple of minutes thinking about why people get into debt. So I'm aware that was a very quick canter through the behavioural insights approach, but if you do have any questions, my email address is on the slide, so you can get in touch with me directly. So thinking about why do people get into debt? Now obviously people get into debt because they spend more than they earn or they have as income. So I would expect that people with less money are more likely to get into debt. I'm not disputing that at all, but really where I think behavioural insights is kind of adding an interesting new angle is thinking about some of the things that we know that we have a tendency to do, and that can help explain why people tend to get into debt and perhaps persist in debt and don't seek help as quickly as you might expect them to if you thought they were making these deliberate decisions and choices. So, I've already mentioned that people tend to focus on today and let tomorrow take care of itself. So that means that we focus on the pleasure of consuming today. So we might, go out, we might buy a new car, we might do all this stuff, and we delay the payments because lots of things now are, you buy now and you pay over a number of years. So mortgages are an obvious example. You get your home today, but then you're paying back your mortgage for 20, 30 years. And because we focus so much on the pleasure of today, we often don't think about the future. So with mortgages, it's a good example of we will look, can we afford this much? What are the payments at the moment? And we might completely ignore the fact that mortgage payments could go up significantly if interest rates changed. But also things like we don't really think about the possibility of losing our job, having other expenses to cope with. Companies also use this. Companies understand behavioural insights, so they will often offer products with a particularly attractive upfront presentation. So it might, for example, be a very low upfront cost for something. So cars are a good example of this. You take them on a monthly payment, and actually at the end you don't own the car, you've just spent a lot of money hiring a car effectively, but people won't focus on that. What they will focus on is the monthly payments and whether they can afford them. So that's why people get into debt. They spend too much today because they don't think about the future and they don't properly weigh up the costs and benefits of borrowing or consuming. People tend to behave in a way as well which supports a positive and consistent image. So there's an example that I've seen cited often, which is apparently 93% of US college students think they are a better than average driver. Obviously, that's not possible. So we tend to overestimate our own abilities. So relating this back to household debt, we can often overestimate, how restrained we are going to be in our future spending. So, we take account of the fact that the mortgage payments are, £100 a month for the next 3 years, and then after 3 years they suddenly will jump to £400 or £500 a month, and we think, okay, well that's fine. Well, I can just cut back a bit on other stuff. That will be fine. I can do all these other things. I'll walk to work. I'll not go on holidays. Blah 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 blah. All that sort of stuff, and we overestimate the way that we will act. So that's another reason, is that we like to have this positive image of ourselves. So we like to think of ourselves as being able to manage our budgets effectively, even when there can be quite a lot of evidence that that is not the case, because we keep thinking, oh yes, well, I'll be fine, I'll be fine. We also tend to go with the flow of preset options. So this can include things such as minimum repayment on credit cards. So this isn't really linked to household debt in terms of how much people pay every month on their mortgage or their rent, but the wider budgeting question. So minimum payments on credit cards are very low, and actually if you only ever pay the minimum payment, in many cases you would never pay the debt off. You would just pay an extremely large interest rate, amount in interest, and kind of keep going. So because we go with the flow of these options, then we tend to just keep going, and this can all feed into it's sort of the thing of just kind of going along. We're not really properly thinking about, okay, well I am in debt and I need to get out of it. You just think, okay, I'm servicing my credit card debts every day or every month and I'm paying my bills, and because you're discounting the future, you don't think about the possibility that if you get a new credit card, then you won't be able to pay all your consolidated debts in the future, or if things will go wrong. So that's, and on defaults as well, there's sometimes a bit of a tendency to sorry, my phone's just rung. I will keep going. There's a tendency to develop sort of particular habitual behaviours. So, for example, we might get into the habit of having a gym membership, and we don't pay for that gym membership, so we just kind of keep going, even though objectively we should stop, and we should stop paying it. But because it goes out of our bank account every month, we just, kind of keep going with it. So they're just a couple of sort of high-level reasons as to why people get into debt. So we focus on today and don't think about the future. We tend to behave in a kind of way, we overestimate our abilities, so we think that we are going to be very good at managing our budget in the future, and also we tend to go with the flow. So we stick with the defaults, whether that's minimum payments or things we've already signed up for. I'm just going to give a couple of options as to how we might help people get out of debt. Now, these are very high level. I have some knowledge of household debt, but I would not claim to be an expert at all. I know the speaker who's following me has a lot of real life contact with people in debt and has spoken to lots of people, so will know the reasons as to why individuals get into debt. But I just thought it would be useful to give some ideas of how we could think, using a behavioural lens, think about some approaches to try and help people. So going back to my point of the fact that we tend to focus on today and not on the future, so try and think about delaying the pleasure of consuming today, but bringing forward the pleasure of being debt-free, for example. So that could be getting people to talk to people who've paid off their debts and kind of hearing about how that's improved their lives, and also trying to get people to just stop and think a little bit. So to create a kind of a way to stop them just spending thoughtlessly. So it could be something like people need to, there's a certain check, so before they need to spend a certain amount of money, over a certain amount, they need to check with their husband or wife or whatever, for example. Then there's also about getting people to commit to pay off their debt. So I said we like to have a positive self-image. We also like to have an image that is consistent with what we have said we will do. So when people stand up and say in public, I will do this, they are more likely to do it. So we could get something about getting people, if we're working with them in a debt advice situation, to work with them to write down exactly how they're going to pay off their debts and what actions they will take to do that. So, for example, if they need to pay back £100 a month over the course of 2 years, then get them to write that down. And so they've committed to it, so they've said, I will pay back £100 a month for the next 2 years, but also to get them to specifically name what they will do to pay those things off. So I will do this by, for example, not paying, by cancelling my gym membership. We could also change the default amount that people pay each month on their bills, so relating a bit more to credit cards, but rather than setting them at £5 minimum, setting them at a minimum amount that will pay off their debts over the next year or two or whatever. Obviously this would require agreement by the credit card companies. A way around that, rather than, because that's quite a complicated way of doing it, is if you get people to think about it and then just, relating to the previous point, commit to paying how much off their credit card for a month. And then finally, thinking about timeliness. So I know there's a lot of concern about the fact that people who are in debt don't contact the mortgage debt advice line. Now, is there some way that you can proactively find out who they are and contact them? So, for example, partnering with banks or building societies, or if people have come into other local organisations and you've kind of come across them, and then you can contact them proactively and try and tap into making it the default option is that they do this thing. So you bring them up and you say, we would like to make an appointment to discuss your spending or whatever. You can think about all these things, but just try and approach them so that you're making it easy for them to do it because you're the one contacting them, and then you're also kind of presenting it as, well, this is just what you do, so people tend to go with that. So I think my time is up now. I've slightly overrun the 15 minutes. Apologies for the slight interruption in the middle with my phone. But yeah, if you do have any questions, as I said, these slides will be sent round as well, so feel free to get in touch, and it'd be great to hear from you. Thank you. Bye.